Hi, my name's Natty. I used to be a men's rights activist, and now I make videos about Gynocentrism theory, women, and Orthodox Christianity. Today I want to talk about why patriarchy needs paternalism and why the Orthodox Church knows this. Modern egalitarianism made a fundamental error. It convinced men that patriarchy is something they choose rather than something that inevitably forms. Patriarchy is not an ideology. It is the persistent structure of male power, responsibility, and relational authority that emerges whenever and wherever men gather in groups. The real question has never been whether patriarchy exists, but what kind of patriarchy is allowed to form. The real question is also, how can we decide what type of patriarchy is allowed to form and get rid of this silly idea that we can exist without one, because we can't. Modern patriarchy is rooted in individualism rather than fatherhood. It lacks paternalism. Men are no longer shaped by elders, initiated into responsibility, or restrained by wisdom. There is no binding of brothers into a moral order, no transmission of meaning downward. Power remains, but formation disappears, and what survives is authority without fatherhood. A patriarchy without fathers becomes adolescent. It cannot govern itself, cannot protect the vulnerable, at least not properly, and cannot integrate difference without fear. Lacking an internal hierarchy of wisdom, it turns its anxiety outward, especially towards women. Adam blaming Eve once again. And if anyone's been on social media lately, they know that this is happening very intensely at this present time. This failure is often misdiagnosed as gynocentrism, the theory that the West centers women at the expense of men. Gynocentrism theory correctly senses that something is distorted in modern sex relations, but it catastrophically misidentifies power. Modern societies do not orbit female desire. They orbit technocratic utility, market optimization, and abstract systems that reduce persons to functions. And women are not centered as subjects. They are exploited as signals. Their bodies, fertility, sexuality, and emotional labor are extracted and instrumentalized by institutions that are fundamentally indifferent to human flourishing. And I want to add to that when we do have policies to protect the vulnerable, which the men's rights movement and other men whining on social media will talk about, these are rooted in the idea that we need to have workers, and we need to view people like they are a number in an algorithm. They don't center people in a holistic, person-centered way, especially not women. A society that truly centered women would be maternal, protective of children, resistant to industrial abstraction, and ordered around care rather than efficiency. Ours is none of these things. What gynocentrism theory mistakes for female rule is in fact the absence of paternal authority among men, leaving systems free to manipulate feminine traits without offering women protection, honor, or real, true authority. That's why we have the girl boss versus trad wife meme. Neither side has any kind of true authority. Egalitarianism intensifies the problem by attempting to erase sex difference altogether. Because it cannot tolerate irreducible difference, it treats the feminine counterpart, nurture, receptivity, memory, and prophecy, as a threat to sameness. Matriarchy not as domination, but as orientation is rendered illegitimate. The feminine is flattened into neutrality or pathologized as manipulation. Neo-reactionary patriarchy arises as a backlash to this collapse, and we're seeing that right now. But it remains trapped with the same modern ontology. This is most clearly seen in Protestant complementarian and patriarchal theologies that characterize much of Christian nationalism. Though they speak the language of order and headship, they ground hierarchy not in sacramental reality but in abstraction. Their theological center is frequently a semi-Arian account of the Trinity. Yes, you heard me. Most notably, the doctrine of the eternal subordination of the Son, where authority is detached from shared nature, and submission is redefined as an eternal role rather than a freely assumed priestly act of love. This shift is decisive. When submission is ontologized rather than offered, hierarchy ceases to be relational and becomes mechanical. Kingship is no longer cruciform, it is positional. Priesthood disappears, authority is asserted without sanctification, and obedience is demanded without communion. What results is not Christian patriarchy, but a baptized form of technocratic power. Because this framework lacks genuine paternalism among men, elderhood, restraint, spiritual fatherhood, it cannot integrate the feminine without anxiety. Feminine receptivity is reduced to passivity, prophecy to disorder, nurturance to threat. Woman is defined primarily by submission rather than her own God-given orientation toward life, meaning, and moral memory. Complementarity collapses into asymmetry, hierarchy hardens into domination. This is why neo-reactionary and Christian nationalist patriarchy so often converges with secular reactionary movements. Despite their rhetoric, they retain the same egalitarian foundations they claim to oppose. So those movements are the manosphere, red pill, technocratic transhumanism, sweaty Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, you get in the picture, the tech bros, lolberts and libertarians. I've lost myself now. Despite their rhetoric, they retain the same egalitarian foundations they claim to oppose, like I just said. Mind over body, power over communion, optimization over love. Having denied the priestly, voluntary, and salvific submission of the Son to the Father, they can only imagine order as control. And having no fathers among men, they turn their corrective impulse toward women. That's why you're seeing all the men whining about modern liberal women. The conclusion is always the same. Women must be managed, disciplined, or reformed to stabilize male order. Not because women are disordered, but because a patriarchy severed from paternalism cannot tolerate difference without fear. Orthodoxy offers a radically different vision because it refuses both egalitarian flattening and reactionary domination. The Orthodox Church does not deny patriarchy, it sanctifies it. It becomes Christ-like. Its patriarchy is ordered around wise, holy men, elders, saints, confessors, men who submit themselves first to God, to truth, to reality. All authority flows downward only because obedience has flowed upward. Kingship is legitimate only when it is priestly, cruciform, and restrained by the fear of God. And Orthodoxy never attempts to abolish the feminine counterpart. Matriarch is not a rival power to be suppressed, but a complementary orientation with a shared moral world. The feminine guards memory, discerns meaning, and names truth. Without it, patriarchy becomes tyranny. Without patriarchy, matriarch becomes chaos. Sever either from priestly submission, and both collapse into distortion. Orthodoxy insists that all three offices, prophet, king, and priest, must be held together, and they exist in both men and women, but are oriented and embodied differently, and held together not by power, but by love and submission to God. Patriarchy does not need abolition, like I said at the beginning of my speech. it needs paternalism. And paternalism is not produced by ideology, it is produced by sanctity. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Hopefully you understood what I was saying and I didn't speak too fast. I'm probably going to do another version of this that's a little bit more accessible and shorter. But I think those that understand will understand. God bless.